Okay, scale hive update. Today is May 22nd. We'll check the weights. Our yellow hive, 73.5. Our green hive, 75 pounds. So today the plan is pretty simple. We're getting towards the end of May. There's a chance that bees may start to show some swarming behaviors. So I'm going to be looking pretty quickly for queen cells. We put these supers on a week ago, so I'll check and see what they're doing in those, if anything. Their weight really hasn't increased a lot, just slow and steady day by day. So we'll see how they're doing as far as space and if they're showing any signs of swarming. If it's there, I'll be sure to show you up close. If not, this can be a pretty quick inspection. Okay, yellow hive first, and I'll look up in the super. Usually I just sort of crack the super off, but we'll have a look at it today. Oh, you see the bees are up there pretty nicely. Let me see if they've actually put anything in this, or if they're just up there maybe repairing that comb and working away. So right in the middle, there is actually some honey being put away in these cells. So maybe I'll show you a close-up of that. So here is a little bit of honey that the bees are starting to store. If you can see it, the shiny spots in those cells. Okay, so you saw some honey in there. I'm gonna take off this super. It's another sort of rainy day. Probably less rain than last week, but it did rain here in the morning, but the bees are okay. Okay, we'll get rid of this queen excluder. Gently. Just lean that up out front. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of bees up in here. They're just starting to use that honey super. You know, this time of year, they're not putting away a lot of honey up in that honey super, but we really put them on, or I make sure to get some on in a good time in the early summer, because the adult bee population really needs more than just this one box to live in. So even if they're not bringing in a lot of honey, getting a super on them is pretty necessary this time of year. So I'm just giving a quick inspection, checking out if there's any queen cells being made. That's the main thing right now. There's a lot of bees here. Still wearing a sweater because it was pretty cool this morning. Also, it's really calm and wet, and the mosquitoes are out like crazy. Just pulled apart a bunch of drone brood that was on the bottom of that frame. That's okay. Okay, we've got through a few frames of brood so far and don't see any signs of queen cells being made. That's a lot of pollen, some brood. There are a lot of drones in these colonies now, which is great because I'm trying to get queens mated now. So on this frame here, I've got our queen. She's here, marked yellow. And that's it. I mean, I've looked at 4 or 5 frames of brood now, and there's no queen cells being made. Our old queen is still here, laying good, and this is ready to be put back together. Okay, now we'll get into the second hive here. Again, I'll just have a look. Remember, this hive had a lower population than our yellow lid one. This inner cover's stuck to the frames. Okay, there's our bees up in the super. I don't know if you remember, in this hive, a lot of the brood was pushed further to the inside of the box there, and that seems to be where all the bees are coming up through onto the honey super frames. Actually, they've put a fair amount of honey just down into the middle here, a little bit on that side. So that's good, but they're nowhere near filling out this box. Okay, we'll get the super off. Smoke here. Get our queen excluder off. Okay, now I'll have a look at this hive. So if you remember last week, I put a frame out here. I took out one really heavy honey frame that the queen wasn't going to be able to lay in without the bees doing a lot of work, and I added a real empty, nice new comb frame, and I think it's this one. And they're actually mostly putting honey in the one side, but on this side there are some eggs laid in a section down here. Okay, don't worry too much about that. It's a little too tricky to show you with the way the light is and the light colored foundation with the eggs, but the queen has started laying on that frame a little bit. And then the same thing, I'm just going to go through here and look at least a few frames nicely covered in brood and see if they have shown any signs of raising a queen cell for the effort of swarming. That's a nice frame of brood. Okay. So questions about swarming are probably the most common questions that I get regarding management of single brood chamber colonies. Everyone just assumes that colonies are going to want to swarm, but that's not necessarily true. Like I said, potentially there is more than enough room in a single box for the queen to lay, as long as they're managed well. Your comb is nice, and as long as you give them lots of empty space in the honey supers before they need it, ideally, not just when they need it. And then if you do see indications that they might want to swarm, there are ways to take action against that. So far I'm not seeing anything. But to be clear, if I see any indication that these bees want to swarm, I will definitely include it in the video, because I know it's what we're all interested in. We'll see how this season progresses. This is about as far as I'm going to look here. Our queen's laying well. No indications of a queen cell being made. Okay, so I'm putting this back together now. So yeah, as I finish putting these back together, I just wanted to say, finish that thought. Like, swarming behavior is a result of one, just simply the genetics, natural behaviors of the bees, and some bees are more inclined to exhibit that behavior than others, and it's something that we actually try and breed against. And then the way that they're managed as well. So how much space are they given, at what time, how much room does the queen have to lay, how much room do all these bees have to store any incoming resources of pollen and nectar. So a lot of people have different thoughts on how to best manage that behavior, and I have my own methods, but like I said, we haven't had to really come up against the issue yet, but we'll see as the summer goes on. I'll keep an eye out for it, and my goal with these two hives is to show you how I would manage to try and maximize honey production, which is managing your bees without swarming at all. So I sort of hope that that does come up and I can sort of demonstrate what I do. But until then, I'll just keep watching them. And I've decided not to add another honey super right now. It's nice to see that these bees are working well on the first super that I gave them. And that population hasn't really exploded to the point where it needs another box yet. But as soon as it does, probably in the next week or so, I'll be sure to fill you guys in. So thanks again for watching, and thanks for staying up to date with all my scale hive videos.